Jayesh, we have known you for a few years now, and I would say Hotstar sort of played a pivotal role in your career, right? Working along with Akash and the likes, right? So, talk to us about the challenges of building products while you were at Hotstar.
And Hotstar back then was going through a transition. When we started, we didn't look ahead and plan for the scale that we eventually got, right? But the scale kept on sort of, presenting problems at us, right? So, those were the unique challenges, right? My second, the second aspect of scale, which is the diversity in the audience. And the challenge we had there was, Disney wanted to launch Hotstar in the whole of Middle East, the whole of Southeast Asia, including, of course, growing in India and the South Asian market, right? And this is where I realized that the expectations of the users, the local needs of that market are entirely different.
Hi everyone, welcome to Minimum Viable Podcast, a podcast series brought to you by PM School. I am Ankit, co-founder of PM School, and I co-host this podcast along with my good friend and co-founder of PM School, Nikunj Sharma. Today on the podcast, we have a very special guest, Jayesh Sidhwani, CEO, co-founder of Command K / Enclave. And with talking about Jayesh, I've known him for 12 plus years now, and both of us almost started our career together in the same company. And I've seen him progress from being an entrepreneur to a software development engineer, and then eventually leading growth engineering at Hotstar, and then leading engineering at Jupiter. And as they say, life comes full circle, and he's gone back to building in the 0 to 1 phase. So welcome to the podcast, Jayesh. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Ankit. Thanks, Nick. I was excited for the conversation ahead.
Awesome. So, Jayesh, we have known you for a few years now, as I mentioned already. And, I would say Hotstar sort of played a pivotal role in your career, right? Working along with Akash and the likes, right? So, talk to us about the challenges of building products while you were at Hotstar, especially from the perspective of an engineering leader, who has to constantly think at scale.
Yeah, for sure. I feel that it's important to quickly share context before Hotstar, and then I'll put Hotstar into context
Absolutely.
and answer your question. So you mentioned I started up very early in my career. My first company was in 2011, and I was building a web conferencing tool very similar to Google Hangout. And our thesis was exactly similar. We said that, hey, the WebEx and Citrix of the world are not good because each time to do a conference, you have to download 50 megabit of software just to get started. And this has to be much simpler than that. And the simplest approach was just sharing a URL and getting started. And that was a thesis going in. Did that, didn't work out, unfortunately. But since then, actually, when it didn't work out, I had two options. One was the obvious one of doing my MS and going to the US, which 80% of my, graduate class did. The other option was, just stick around, see how the startup ecosystem is evolving in India. And I chose latter. Pros and cons, I'd say, as I look back, con is the startup ecosystem took a long time to really flourish in India. But the pro is also that, because it took a lot of time, it gave me a good opportunity to see this whole, ecosystem evolve very closely. I got a ringside view of how startups, matured in India. Right now, what that meant was, right from 2011 until I joined Hotstar, I was working with very early stage companies. Most often, I was the first engineering employee, if not one of the very early engineering employees, and the grind was usually 0 to 1 for me. And then came Hotstar. Hotstar was a unique challenge because technically, again, in Hotstar, I was one of the very early engineering employees. And Hotstar back then was going through a transition and trying to evolve itself into a technology company and not a media company, right? So there was a lot of focus on engineering excellence, hiring great engineers, and building the product all in house. And mind you, we're talking about 2017, where we'd still not heard a great engineering company coming out of India, right? There was Flipkart, sure, but now if you look at the state in India, there's PhonePe. There's like ton of excellent technology companies. There's Dream11. There's a ton of excellent technology companies coming out of India, right? Back then, it was still very nascent, the space here, right? So for me, the biggest challenge was, hey, I was a very rusty 0 to 1 engineer. I came into an organization that was uniquely a 0 to 1, yet a very mature business in itself, right? Like Star was a thriving business already, right? We had to figure out what it meant for us. Of course, we couldn't lose our agility, but we couldn't also not be innovative, right? And and scale was something that happened, to be honest, right? Geo was launched around the same time. Netflix entered in India around the same time. So when we started, we didn't look ahead and plan for the scale that we eventually got, right? But the scale kept on sort of presenting problems at us, right? So those were the unique challenges, right? Like the non-functional challenges, if I mean, those are the unique challenges that we started building the products within Hotstar, right? Now when we started doing it, right, and you stressed a lot upon what scale meant for us, right? Looking back, I realized, and I sort of made this clarification for myself, right? Scale is not just the number of users who come on a platform. Scale is also the variety of users that come on the platform. And I had this realization very late during my Hotstar stint. When we started, of course, it was about, hey, how do we serve 1 million concurrent users to 5 million concurrent users to soon it became 10, then 18, then 25, right? Like the number kept on, increasing. And what it meant for engineering is, when you build systems, right? If you face a problem, your usual attempt is to go, watch some YouTube videos, watch some talks, read some blogs, go and see if there is precedence, has somebody done it, that you could start off from. For us, it wasn't like that, right? Like for us, year after year, we were breaking the ceiling or breaking our own world record, right? So there wasn't a precedence. There wasn't something we could go back and see, hey, how did a company X solve it, and how do we tackle it, right? So that posed the biggest challenge in my opinion, and that challenge was sort of spread across everything we did, right? Like personally, I started off with building the personalization team for Hotstar to building the data infrastructure for Hotstar. Then I was very closely, involved in the core re-architecture of Hotstar, the core infrastructure that ended up doing the peak concurrency, at Hotstar. And towards the end, I was involved in growth and expansion as well, right? But like this was a unique challenge that we had throughout building products, right? My second, the second aspect of scale, which is the diversity in the audience. This is something I realized when I was handling the growth team, the growth engineering team for this time Disney Plus Hotstar. By now, Hotstar was acquired by Disney Plus, right? And the challenge we had there was, Disney wanted to launch Hotstar in the whole of Middle East, the whole of Southeast Asia, right? Including, of course, growing in India and the South Asian market, right? And this is where I realized that the expectations of the users, the local needs of that market are entirely different. What MEA needs is very different from what we'd already built in India and very different from what Southeast Asia needs. Within Southeast Asia, the demands from Singapore is very different from that in Philippines, to that in Thailand, to that in Malaysia. And that was a new unique perspective of scale that I got to build for, right? Yeah, top of my mind, broadly, these were the unique challenges that I faced at Hotstar. You would love to sort of go deep into any of those. You guys feel like.
Awesome. So you mentioned, when you guys launched in Middle East, so a completely different sort of a cohort of users, right? So could you talk to us about, probably giving certain examples of what kind of a cohort or what were, the pain points which you realized that, okay, these users want this to be solved, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest one was regulation, compliance, censorship across all of these markets. And, we were a video platform, right? You'd get one single feed of a video, and now the challenge is how do we use that same feed to ensure that it runs, as per the laws, as per the local laws in all of these markets, right? That to me was the biggest challenge, right? And you know, the fundamental challenge also, right? Like, so, and the other challenges are quite, tactical, I would say, right? Like for instance, Thailand, I realized, loves to watch their movie on 4K resolution. They don't like anything below that. And they people love to watch it on big TVs. In India, we see people love to watch things on the go on their mobile, right? So those are some of the differences we saw in Indonesia. For instance, Indonesia behaves very similarly to India, right? So India and Indonesia had a lot of parallels in TV consumption. On censorship, there was a wide spectrum. There were countries that were very, very conservative, but there were countries that were very, open. And if you would censor, even a kissing scene or, you know, any of the adult content, well, adult content would be an extreme, but any let's say nude scene in a movie, folks would be unhappy that we've done that, right? But in more aggressive markets, folks would just don't want anything of that sort. So it was good fun, because all of these constraints did put a lot of pressure on our engineering teams, on our teams that processed video, right? Yeah, those are some of the unique challenges we did. We didn't, quite reach at streaming live content in these markets. I do imagine that would have been really, really interesting to see how regulations interplay with live content, right? Because the world entirely changes when you have to do all these things on a live content versus a video on demand content, right? But those are some of the things that varied across these markets, from Middle East to Southeast Asia.
I have another follow-up on, other markets as well. So are other markets like Middle East or, Southeast Asia are as competitive as India when it comes to pricing as well, for Hotstar, for Disney Hotstar?
Yeah, I don't know how much I can comment on that, though, I'd stay away from the specifics. But from whatever I realize, yes, 100%, right? Like, Southeast Asia, even culturally, is very similar to India, right?
Correct.
People do want good content, but, people are mindful of how much they spend. Middle East, pockets of Middle East, I realized, have very affluent audience. Talk about UAE, Saudi, etc. People can pay. There's no no problem in paying if there's quality service to be offered, right? So it did vary across Middle East versus in Southeast Asia. North Africa also is very competitive, is very price sensitive, right? So yeah, there is no one answer, to be honest. It really boiled down to the country within that market that you're catering to, and how that economy is, you know, it sort of added a lot of impact on how we, structured our pricing as well.
Got it.
All right. Just changing gears, just talking about scale, right? I understand like scaling, especially looking at streaming in India, right? When we talk about cricket, I was just thinking like, how do you sort of think of a system which is scaling from, let's say, a certain number and within, and I'd seen this firsthand when I used to see cricket, let's say if India is not batting, you see like half the numbers, and when India comes to bat, the numbers would exponentially increase, or let's say if Dhoni is batting how do you sort of design a system? And like the reason I ask this is not just purely like handling streaming. It's also about you're trying to figure out, okay, what content different users, and I've seen Hotstar plug in not just streaming, but with that streaming, certain sort of engagement modules like the fours and sixes. And like I think you had integrated Swiggy also on top of that, online ordering. So how do you like think of like designing that system? And my intent here is to ask from a product manager's lens more, because a lot of our viewers are product managers who are looking at the system, right? So handling that concurrent user base while streaming and thinking of growth opportunities, since you looked at growth, right? Like how do you design a system to, because when you must have designed like day one, you must have assumed certain sort of load. And at that time, you thought that, hey, I'm only sort of building this system for like OTT, that is streaming. But a lot of use cases came in thereafter, wherein the growth team or maybe the business team said that, hey, let's build X on top of it. Maybe it will drive more engagement or like new sort of avenues of growth.
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I think one thing I've realized, and this is a personal realization over the time after I worked at Hotstar Jupiter, then largely when I'm working for my own startup now, right? And a couple of realizations are, systems are malleable, right? Like things change. So what you start off with and what you end with is always entirely different, right? So as product persons, as engineering person, we need to embrace that, and we shouldn't be overwhelmed just looking at the end state, right? Things evolve, right? And two, and it's slightly similar in similar context is, when we look at Hotstar now, as an individual who would think about developing a system like that would be very worried, perplexed that, hey, how do you build such a complex system, right? And likewise, look at Flipkart, look at Amazon. If you stand today and want to build a system, you would be very scared to think about the complexity that have gone into it, right? But usually it is one of those things, right? Looking back, you realize that, hey, everything was a building block, right? And I feel that to be like a system, to allow a system to grow, right? Like you said, we started off just focusing on streaming video, then we layered the user interactions with something called watch and play, emojis, etc. Then we layered e-commerce when we allowed people to interact with Swiggy. Kept on layering things on top of that, right? Now that's possible only if you are building anything with first principles in mind, right? Because the way systems evolve is you start from zero, take it till a point. Everything else that happens after that entirely depends on how good you build the system up until then. A very cliched analogy would be, you're building a residential complex, right? You can't build 60 floors, right at the beginning, right? You have to sort of have the first floor's foundation laid correctly for the others to follow, right? So I think as we build, we built everything keeping first principles in mind. And again, when I say that, and you also brought a point about system design, right? One realization has been that the definition for system is very different for different people. And most often people don't include users, their behaviors, their expectations in system, right? Whenever I've had this discussion with people and we've sort of touched upon system design, I don't know why, but most often folks end up thinking about the engineering architecture, the product design. But that's not just it, right? Like it's the entire system that has to work, harmoniously as a fabric for your product to grow, right? So, if I were to do something again, right, I don't want to worry about the end state, right? The end state, you would reach at the end state only if you do what you're doing now the right way, right? But yeah, just keep the first principles in mind. You need to know why you're building a thing, who you're building it for, right? Like you need to know that very well before you go and build that thing, right? And it starts from there, right? Sure, as systems grow, as more users use your product, as more people join the team, there are more derivative ideas that you start getting. Because the systems are strong, we could push out. One, and this realization for me, at least personally, has sort of strengthened over time. And an example that I'd like to give is what we were doing, in my company, Enclave and Command K. We'll talk about it, of course, later. But our Uber thesis was we realized that developers struggle with building secure products, and you wanted to make it simpler for them, right? The day we started building, of course, any of the startup would have a very scrappy way of building things. And I like to distinguish scrappy from agility. You can be agile yet build systems from first principles, and we chose that path, right? And for us, the way we define agility is we wanted to build a different product, and we had that realization in September last year, right? And it would be hard for me to draw the context, but the first product that we built, the amount of work that we did, we took about a year, maybe 14 months to build that product. The second product took us just 3 months, and when I look back, I realized that hey, in these 3 months, you were able to squeeze in a lot more than what we were able to do in those 14 months. And this is what I mean by, hey, are you building things at any point in time with first principles? Marry it with Hotstar. You are able to bring in commerce on top of a video. You're able to bring in engagement on top of a video because our core was very sorted. We focused a lot on ensuring the core is built correctly. For the entire 2018, I believe, right, the focus was just on that, right? Like, if you can go back and look at the screens, the mobile screens, and look at the product of that time, it was very bare bone, right? The UI was clunky. Folks used to complain about how not so good Hotstar is compared to Netflix. But under the hood, we were building a very strong system, right? Netflix has never done a peak concurrency of whatever we were able to, not even like a fraction of the peak concurrency that we were able to do. People cannot see that, of course, right? But that's resilience, right? That is what you focused on, right? Look at the Hotstar product today, 2023. Look at the Hotstar product today. I can bet my money Hotstar product is, in many aspects better than the Netflix product, right? If not as good as it, right? But that's what we got, by focusing on the core, ensuring we do it right, and then everything else was a layer on top of it, right? And when I said this, I remembered something our CTO used to say back then. He used to always compare it with like an onion peel, right? Like you're building a core and you're like keeping on layering things on top of it, ensuring that the core is always intact, and the layers just add on to more functionality, right? But if a core is fragile, you can't expect anything to be built on top of it, right? So those are my learnings, right? And like, just to summarize, one key takeaway that I've carried on with my life is, hey, just broaden your understanding of what a system is. Your system is not just the back end and the front end. Your system is much more than that.
All right. Jayesh, since we are on Hotstar, I just have something that I ask everyone, at least I know from this industry. Recommendation systems are kind of like a mystery. Obviously, every website or product approaches in a different way, but especially from a OTT movies or TV shows or like what Hotstar is or Netflix is, how did you guys approach recommendation? Like when I say recommendation, essentially it could be mean two things. One is essentially like when I land on the homepage, it could be like a new user or someone who's been using Hotstar for some time. But having said that, I'm pretty sure you must have had your own feature store, or I'm not sure how you like track user behavior. I found it super challenging for recommending like something to a new user. Obviously, compared to once you already have some body of work, you have a sense of the user behavior. Maybe you can like run a lot of experiments basis the type of content they have watched. But like, can you just shed light on how recommendation function or worked, or maybe not going into the system end to end, but things that mattered and what all like data did you collect at a user level?
Yeah. Our recommendation systems evolved from like 2018 to what it is now, and so did the team. I still remember when we started a recommendation system, building recommendation system within Hotstar. We had a couple of interns, and I guess a couple of not senior but fairly experienced machine learning engineers, and we started building our first model. It's a very naive collaborative filtering model that we got off the ground with, right? But since then our systems have evolved massively, and I think the big turn of events happened in 2019, around that time frame, when Hotstar acquired a company based out of Beijing, right? And we had about 10 odd machine learning engineers from that team, just focusing on, to begin with, recommendation and then on advertisement systems as well, right? And that just changed the landscape for how personalization slash recommendation slash even advertisements were done within Hotstar, right? Now, as far as the data is concerned, we, since the very beginning, we had a very elaborate data infrastructure setup. We used to get data in real time, the behavioral data in real time, even in 2018. In fact, I had written a blog post around that time, and then A couple of my team members wrote a follow-up to that blog post as well, around 2020, etc. Right? But as far as the infrastructure was concerned, as far as the ability to collect data, to securely store it, to allow analysts to, sort of analyze that data, derive insights, we had a very sophisticated system right from the beginning, and it kept on evolving. Right now, as far as the modeling was concerned, right, like we looked at it from two points of views, right, points of view, right. One is of course using all the engagement data and figuring out what you would want. But there of course was a cold start challenge that you also referred to, right? And I remember towards the end, and this was toward the fag end of my time at Hotstar as well, so I cannot recall a lot of it, but our team started delving into scene detection. Team started delving into different aspects of a video, and started marrying that to the local behavior of the region, of the audience in that market. And that's how we solved the cold start problem. To a very good degree, we were able to do that. But one problem that always has been there with Hotstar is Hotstar has a variety of content, right? There's TV shows, then there is, English content, then there is sports. And the audience for, even just the three of these is very, very different, right? Like, moms would watch a TV show, but people like us would watch English content, but some of us would not watch that content, but would watch, sports, they watch football, they watch cricket, right? It was very hard to, and it still, I believe, is very hard to solve the cold start problem for a product like Hotstar. Though the Beijing team has been able to cover a lot of ground, and I mean, if you open the Netflix, the Hotstar app rather, on day zero, it works fabulously, right? And I think after some usage, it becomes rather simple for models to build a taste profile for you, right? Yeah, but unfortunately for me, this was towards the fag end of my time at Hotstar, so I couldn't follow a lot of developments. But this is broadly what I could recall. The teams spreading R&D on.
Awesome. So, Jayesh, typically at PM School in the last 6 to 7 months, FinTech has been like the hottest sector for, PM School grads to join, right? Almost, all of them want to join as a APM or a PM intern or as a PM1 at a FinTech company. And you are someone who's been a engineering leader / leader at, at a major FinTech. You were post Hotstar, you moved to, Jupiter as a VP of engineering, back to a 0 to 1 phase, that too in a highly regulated environment. So can you lay out a few skills useful for, aspiring PMs or PMs, in a 0 to 1 phase, especially in FinTech?
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting. You say that skills for a PM in 0 to 1. And the audience might like totally not like me saying it. I've developed a belief that in the 0 to 1 phase, the CEO is your PM. You can't
Correct.
have a PM to 0 to 1, but of course 0 to 1. So Jupiter might be different. But yeah, I think look at it varies from industry to industry. Since you're just talking about FinTech, regulation, like you said, is very important, right? And it's sort of at the face of it, compliance regulation often feels like a checkbox that somebody has to tick. But if you really end up solving it, regulation, I love to believe, is a fabric that
Correct.
everybody needs to be aware of. Everybody needs to apply in whatever they're doing, right from even the IT team just responsible for giving out the new, laptops to new employees. They need to be mindful of regulation. They need to be mindful of how they're dealing with employee data, right? How they are managing the addresses of the employees while shipping out the laptop, right? It starts from there. Of course, it goes to your products that you build, how you store consumer data, etc. Right? I don't know when would this podcast go out live, but on Feb 29th, I'm actually doing a talk with HasGeek, where we're diving deep into just this topic. For 2 hours, we're just talking about what is data privacy, why is there need for, like, there's a heightened need for data protection in these times, and how should one think about it. right? And I believe, from a product manager point of view, also, there's a lot of education that everybody should have on regulation, on compliance. And I say that because, this is not specific to Jupiter per se, right? I've been advising a lot of fintech companies. A lot of my friends are building fintech companies, right? So keep talking to a lot of founder friends on this as well. Oftentimes product and engineering, are at odds in regulated companies on one aspect, the user experience and what is capable from a regulation point of view, right? And that's where you have the most friction, right? You would want to have the best experience, but that might, lead you to take some decisions that are not, in line with the compliance requirements, right? Without naming this company, there was this thread recently on Twitter that went viral where, somebody just inspected the API response of an onboarding process, and they could see, the API returning PAN card details about users, and you could query any user and get their PAN card, right? So, you know, to have good experience, we tend to, not take care of security, not take care of compliance, right? Now, I'm not saying that, hey, go on either extreme, right? It's always a spectrum, and you need to know where to stop in between. And this, I guess, is the most important skill that a product manager should have, right? So, and going back to a systems definition, right? The system in this case not just includes the users, not just includes your governing regulator, it includes your legal team, it includes your risk team, right? It includes what's the founder's risk appetite, right? And it includes your engineering team as well, right? Like how much they are able to do within the limits of regulation, right? So anybody getting into a regulated company, right? Even if you are, getting into regulated company, building a product that sits on the fringe of the core regulated work, you must understand these regulations, closely. You must go and read those, white papers that RBI publishes, or circular that RBI publishes. You must read everything, and understand everything thoroughly, right? Because any action you take, any decision you make, somewhere in the back of the mind, you must know what it could lead to, right? And it's simple things, right? It's even talking to a consumer, right? When you're talking to a consumer, just taking feedback, right? That conversation will be different if you're representing a regulated company versus otherwise, right? Apart from that, I think it's very similar to perhaps any other company that's unregulated. But as far as going into a regulated company, I would recommend you to do that, right? For instance, now India is coming up with a new data protection law, right? It's called the DPDPA, the DPDP Act, right? As a product person, you must read every word of that. You must understand what it means, right? Because so we are building a product for that, and one of the examples I give to customers is, and this is true again, the audience, the listeners might not like me for that, is as product persons, and I'm guilty of it in my recent work as well, but as product persons, if we get data, it activates our brains to unimaginable levels, right? Like we get data, we understand or we unlock new ways of processing it, and these new ways demand new data, so we collect those data and further figure out new ways of processing it, right? There's no stop to it. But with this new law coming in, it'll make it extremely hard for you to do this exercise, right? But the newer challenge for all of the product persons would be that, hey, how can I still remain within the boundaries of this law yet continue my innovation, right? So it's a handicap, but you have to figure out, how do you still sort of, continue to innovate within that handicap, right? So that's one skill, I recommend everybody to not run away from, right? I want everybody to, get very comfortable with it, and again, like have it as a ingrained habit within you, right? Anything that comes out of your mind, any idea that comes out of your mind should already have filtered the requirements of compliance regulations, right? That's in my opinion the only way for you to really excel at that job.
Got it. Got it. Jayesh, now finally coming to Enclave, your startup, your baby. You have now transitioned from like being an engineering leader to obviously leaders at like so many different companies in India. But now within your company, I see that you don't have a product manager, and we were talking about this earlier, right? You are the solo product guy at your startup. Can you like talk to us about like how do you tackle these problems? Like essentially, obviously you have a certain set of users which is not like a B2C e-commerce user. This is like a very niche developer first user, right? How are you thinking about like their pain points and essentially PMF in a developer tool SaaS platform company is very different. Maybe pardon me if I don't understand your product stack, but if you can just talk to us about what is Enclave and essentially how are you approaching like product problems? That is like, especially from a product manager standpoint, since you are the product person.
Yeah. Look, I'll start with what we're doing at Enclave, right? So before that, our thesis, when when I was working at Hotstar and then at Jupiter, we briefly touched upon this, you know, in our earlier question where we're talking about how compliance, matters, right? Now, one thing I realized is within engineering, security and engineering is always at odds. These are two functions that have opposing goals, right? Both of which are supremely important. And because these are opposing goals, the teams are always at odds, right? Like a security team would want extremely secure products, but that delays how fast you can ship out new features, which is what engineers are, required to do, right? And when I was working on Hotstar and Jupiter, I interfaced a lot with security teams and I sort of started empathizing more with them. And when we came out of these both experiences, my realization was that, hey, we can't stop engineers from shipping code faster, but how do we empower them, with tools such that any code that they're shipping, though that code is secure by default, right? That was a thesis going into starting up Command K, which is our parent company, and the current product called Enclave, right? And we started off with building a secrets manager where we said that, hey, the most important element in your organization is data, so you must start with protecting data before you do anything else beyond that, right? So secret managers, we like a secret manager that we built allowed companies to protect that data, right? And now we realize that as TPDPA is coming in India, likewise all major consumer economies in the world are coming up with a similar data protection act. EU has had it since a long time. US upgraded CPRA January last year. Saudi launched something very recently. Brazil launched something very recently, and APAC also has plenty of similar laws, right? So every major economy is upping their game on data protection. So what we realized is that apart from just protecting access to data, there's a lot of work that every company now needs to do to protect the actual data at rest, in motion, while being processed, etc. Right? And that's what you're doing with Enclave, right? With Enclave, our promise is simple. Our promise is, hey, if you're a consumer company, if you're handling with consumer data, right, and if you want to comply with these data privacy laws, Enclave helps you do that. But it just doesn't stop at that. It takes you to the last mile of ensuring the data is protected for good as well. So that's what you're doing at Enclave. Now, you asked a couple of questions, if I could recollect correctly, right? Like one was, how are we going about product in this company, and how are we doing it without a product manager, and what's PMF, like in this kind of product? Look, as I said earlier, right, that my thesis has become stronger that 0 to 1, you don't need a product manager, right? And this applies to founders looking to have product managers, and equally so to product managers looking for a 0 to 1 job, right? Because the equation I realize is kind of a misfit at both the ends. A product person going into a 0 to 1 job, would be clueless in a lot of situations, because the founder would come up to you and change the thesis overnight, and well, if not the thesis, the goals, like you were discussing earlier before we started this podcast, right? In startups, it's very common for goals to evolve very rapidly, right? Like you don't work in a 18-month cycle in a startup. You work in a, weekly cycle in a startup, right? You have to be agile and respond to newer demands, newer system changes, right? As well, right? And if as a product person you don't sign up for that, if you don't understand that, you're going to find it very hard to survive in that organization, right? So if you've been a founder in the past, I think then it's easier for you to go do product in a 0 to 1 company. But if you've been a PM in, let's say, a large company, if you've been a PM at Amazon, Flipkart, right, you must change your mindset to a very great extent to adapt to a startup, going through a 0 to 1 journey. That was my realization, and which is why we decided not to hire product managers. But that said, it's humanly not possible for one person to do product sales business. This ton of things that go beyond engineering in an organization, right? So the option that I took was to upskill folks in my team. I started off with my design person. I realized that you know and this is another realization that I've had over time, which is product and design cannot be on two different tangents. They cannot be on two different film of action, right? Like they have to work coherently for a product to scale well, right? And I tested out that theory with my designer. So we started off with a very small problem, kept on increasing the complexity, and reached, now we've reached a place where this designer understands what customers need. This person listens into all the customer conversations. Now they've developed, an understanding of what it means to build a B2B product for developers and in the enterprise security space. It took some time, but that's sort of been helping me right now. What that has done is, to a great extent, execution is off my plate, right? Because of course, the work that this designer does, and also because of the luxury of having a co-founder who is the CTO, right? Who pretty much sort of takes care of execution entirely, right? But as far as product management is concerned, the way I've split it up into is, all the work that goes into talking to customers, understanding or deriving insights from them, conducting demos. Now, that's another thing that I've realized where product needs to be very closely involved. Giving demos is should not be just a sales problem. It is a sales and a product problem now. Depends on how you want to do this. You put in product and sales, or you empower sales to understand product, right? But they need to understand product, right? Sales need to have product element to it, right? So for me it has been, like I said, and I'll summarize, right? Talking to customers, understanding their insights, doing demos, and selling the product. Then of course strategizing a roadmap, and then going and executing it, right? Now executing it is a complex piece in itself, where you're required to constantly work with engineers, ensure that beyond the PRDs they really understand what we're doing, right? And this is where we've taken up multiple newer initiatives, right? For one, we're not thinking of product and engineering as two different synchronous activities, right? For us, neither works in isolation. It does never happen that a product person works on a lot of things, goes through the journey, and ends up with the PRD, and that's when the engineering is involved. We've broken that sequence, and we said that, hey, everybody should work together right from the beginning. And Apple has this really nice thing of, I guess Steve Jobs had this nice thing of assigning a DRI and an SDRI. Ankit would remember, this is something that we used to do a lot at ShopSense, and that's one habit that has sort of followed with me. So a product person's DRI is very different from an engineering person's DRI, but the opposite functions are SDRIs for both, right? So while an engineering person needs to understand product very well, product person also needs to understand engineering very well, right? You can't, as a product person, can't just stop at saying, hey, this is code, I don't understand code. Well, nobody's asking you to write code, but you must understand what goes into building a software, right? And in this day and age, it is not hard to have that expectation from a product person, right? you would never be required to write a code, right? If you can write a code, great, do it. It's always good to sort of do that. But you must understand what goes into writing the code. And what I've realized is, because I've been an engineer for 12 years now doing product, a lot of decisions that I take, I always have this mindset of, hey, what does it mean in an engineering world, right? What does it mean when we have to do something in a fixed timeline, right? How do I cut short the back and forth with engineers to just discover what is possible, what is not possible, right? And this of course also means that I need to be aware of what's already built, the capabilities that are built, right? And engineers are responsible to educate me of how they've built it and how they see it evolve, right? So like sales and product, I guess product and engineering roles also need to come a lot closer than they are today, right? Like today it still feels like there is a distinct handoff period. We used to have this PRD walkthroughs in our companies. I feel it's very late to have PRD walkthroughs to explain the engineers what they have to build, right? There has to be a confluence of the two and define DRS, SDRS, right? Nobody's asking to go make the change in the code, nor is anybody expecting the engineers to, strategize the roadmap. But well, both the parties are, allowed to go and, do the other thing, right? But you must do great on a DRA, but you also must upskill on your SDRA, right? That's one learning I've gotten during my stint doing product for Enclave, right? Regarding PMF, I feel it is a hard problem to just figure out if you've reached a PMF, right? There is no definition for a PMF, right? Sometimes I feel it's just plain feeling. It just the gut feel, that you realize that, oh, it looks like you made it, right? And then that gut feel sort of obviously comes, because of multiple things that happen in your journey, right? But there's been a lot of times where I've tried to sit down and try to at least understand it for myself, what would lead to that gut feeling. And I've come to realize that it is a lot of identifying repeatability in things we do, repeatability in our problem statements resonating with our customers, repeatability in the ICP, accepting our solution, repeatability in our sales motion, repeatability in everything, right? The day we realize there's repeatability in whatever we're doing is when a lot of things are unlocked, right? Is when we can start thinking about growth, and this is when we can start thinking about having product managers, right? Because the day I get a product manager, now I can say that, listen, this is what I've been doing and this is how I've found repeatability. I want you to scale this repeatability, right? This is growth on product. This is a point where I'd go and hire a salesperson and say that, hey, this is how I figured out finding an ICP and this is what works in demos. Just go and scale that for me, right? I feel scaling is not what a single person, it's not what a CEO can do. But identifying that repeatability through the 0 to 1 phase is something only the founders can do, nobody else can do, right? That's what I'm learning largely, right? And that said, PMF is a very evolving aspect in our lifestyle, right? Because in the company's life cycle, because you don't stop at doing a thing, right? You don't need a PMF for a company. You need a PMF for everything. You need a PMF for a new feature that you're launching. You need a PMF for a new market you're going into, right? You need a PMF for a new experiment that you're launching. You need PMF in everything, right? So uh, I guess it just boils down to you equipping yourself to run this mental model and just understand patterns of wherever you're trying to get, wherever you're finding repeatability in that motion, right? I think that's what, in my opinion, PMF is. And yeah, of course, I do want to clarify or do want to put in a disclaimer that, this is my opinion. This is not, there's no definition for it, and your mileage may definitely vary as you discover PMF for things that you're doing.
Awesome, Jayesh. No, totally agree with you on how you are approaching, PMF, and I wholeheartedly agree with you on the concept of SDRI. Nikunj, fun fact: whatever tech I know, Jayesh has taught me. Right. So back in the days, I became a PM by accident, and because everyone wanted to be a PM, and that's why I also became a PM. and I would have a huge imposter syndrome because Jayesh and his team would talk in terms which I wouldn't understand. And after meetings or after work, I would just ping Jayesh that, hey, explain me what you guys were speaking about. So he would be kind enough to explain me what is S3, what is an API, etc., etc. And then he would draw architecture diagrams also for me. So it was really kind of Jayesh, and all the knowledge which I gained has helped me in my career so far. So yeah, thanks for that, Jayesh.
Yeah, you're very kind, Ankit.
Yeah. Coming to the last question, switching gears, we see that at PM School, we have seen a trend that, in every cohort, around 40 to 50% of a cohort is comprised of software developers, software engineers, SD1, SD2, 2, 3 years of experience looking to, break into an APM role or a PM1 role, right? And now that, you being an engineering leader now who's also doubling up as, the product head of a startup. So talk to us about the skills which developers, looking to break into PM should inculcate, especially, younger folks, let's say SD1, SD2, looking to break into, as an APM or a PM1.
Yeah. You know what? This is a very interesting question, and you mentioned imposter syndrome, and I want to also lead off with that, right? Like with all the advancements in AI, everybody is doubting whether their job would exist, a couple of years from now, right? And I, when I think about it and when I try to reason this thing, I always boil down to saying, hey, as an individual in your company, you cannot be a developer, you cannot just be a product person, you just cannot be a salesperson. You have to be a builder, right? You have to build, you have to solve problems, and problems can be different on different days, right? And that's a core capability. And if you're doing a product role, it's just a costume on top of a core capability, right? It is just what you're doing right now, right? And you must be flexible enough to wear a different costume and do something else tomorrow if there is a need for that, right? So the core capability that you must build is just solving problems, just being a builder. And with all the advancements in AI, it's becoming easier than ever, right? Today, you could just throw a GitHub code to GPT and it could explain you what's happening, right? So you don't need to be a developer to really understand, the basics, of course, right? You need to, to become, of course, a pro level advanced engineer. There's hours and hours of practice that you must put. But the barrier to entry has gone down, right? Now, what does that mean, right? It means that anybody could do anything, A, and everything again boils down to how good you are with first principles, right? Now, to a question of how can an engineer become an APM or can they break into product? One of the realizations I've had is, if ever I have to hire product people, I'm rather going to bias folks who've been engineers, to do this role. And I say that because, you know, the just the nature of the work that engineers do, they're forced to solve problems every day, be it converting that PRD to a code to a feature or debugging an issue on production. I think the nature of the work, you keep on doing it every day, day by day, you tend to develop problem solving skills, right? And that's exactly what's required to be a product person. And if your interests are aligned, right, it's very simple. Just go and demonstrate your first principles, and you can be a great product person in any company, right? Apart from that, some of the things that we discussed already, right? SDRI and DRI, even if you go on the other side, now because you understand engineering in a much better way, you're able to take better decisions, right? You must be very open to talking to consumers, and you must know how to talk to consumers, right? And there are a lot of books as well. There's this mom's test, which is very famous, right? But some other examples are maybe just asking why somebody wants it, right? But talking to consumers is another skill that this kind of profile needs to have, because as developers, we do not talk to consumers a lot, right? We've always been bottom of the stack where things have been discovered for us and we just go and convert it into a piece of code. But then you need to now learn how to talk to consumers, because in product, one thing I realized is the most important skill a product person can have is just identifying what the market needs. And it's the hardest of the problem, right? It's easiest to take that, convert it into a roadmap, convert it into a strategy, execute it, lot easier. But talking to hundreds of consumers where nobody would straight up tell you that, hey, I want a particular product. Nobody would tell you that, hey, I want a rocket, or I want a yacht. Nobody's going to tell you that, right? Folks are just going to tell you that, hey, I want to go from one place to another the fastest way possible, right? Up to you to figure out what they mean, right? Up to you to know what kind of questions to ask to get, get the answers you want, right? And that's a skill I realized is very important to have if you want to break into product, right? And this, in my opinion, applies to everybody. It applies to, somebody getting into product straight up, or somebody, migrating from the engineering teams. Yeah, but I think just to summarize to what you asked, I believe the pro is, as developers, you know to solve problems. So realize that you know how to solve problems, right? Realize that everyday grind is teaching you to solve problems, right? And sort of utilize that in a different dimension, right? Like that's one. The other thing that you must upskill is just figure out how to talk to consumers, right? And figure out how to derive insights from all of these conversations. And beyond it, all the other aspects, in my opinion, are fairly tactical. Even if you do 80% a good job, you have enough room to improve on top of that, right? Yeah, but that would be my recommendation to developers thinking about AP and PM roles.
Thank you, Jayesh. That's it for the podcast today. I think this is the first time we've crossed the 50-minute barrier for an episode, but super interesting. I think we covered a bunch of topics, from your Hotstar experience to Jupyter, and finally like ending with your current product and company. Wish you the very best. I hope like Enclave really sort of crosses all the frontiers and you're able to grow it to like maybe 100 million ARR soon. All the best.
And you end up hiring from PM School as well.
For sure. Yeah, no, it was great talking to you guys. Really nice questions. Love
Awesome.